Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the fourth day of our Mindful Employer Conference entitled Wellbeing at Work 2021, COVID-19 and Beyond. My name's John Bradfield and I work for West Yorkshire Police, and I'm involved with the Mindful Employer scheme since 2017 when I was invited to join the Mindful Employer Steering Group. In addition to being your host this morning, I'm also one of today's speakers, so I'm going to save my full introduction to then, as I don't want to spoil the surprises for you. So today's theme is support and resilience at every level. As well as strong leadership, which was discussed on Tuesday, and a healthy culture, which was Wednesday's theme, we need to obviously be equipped with the tools, knowledge and confidence to support ourselves and our colleagues in the workplace as and when the need arises. We also need environments where people feel strengthened and are able to bounce back from challenges when they arise in any organisation, in any sector. And I think really importantly, this applies at every level. There are lots of self-stigma among managers and leaders, some at very senior levels, but we all have mental health and we all have experienced the need for support at different times in our lives and in our careers, leaders and managers as well as staff at every single level. The workshops today will address a range of support needs relating to the current pandemic, but I think it's really important that we recognise that support mechanisms need to be there for so many reasons, whether or not we're in the mix of a global pandemic. The workshops will also provide some useful tools and help us provide the best support we can to ourselves and our colleagues. To start with, we're going to talk about a subject which is very, very close to my own heart, and that's peer support in the workplace and how we do this well. So in a moment, I'm going to be joined by a panel of some very, very wonderful speakers who will discuss the value of peer support at work and share their insights with a wide range of employment contexts taken into account. I'm hoping you're going to leave this with some clear tips on how to start and run peer support within your own workplaces, and have some great examples of some good practice that's already happened to refer to as needed. There's going to be a question and answer session after we've all spoken about our various areas. So please feel free to submit questions to the chat and they'll be answered after each speaker has spoken. So introduce myself a bit fully then, as I am your first speaker of the day. I have that pleasure and honour. So I've been a police officer now for about 18 years. I've reached the rank of inspector and I currently work within West Yorkshire Police's Learning and Organisational Development Department. So my day job, if you like, is to assess newly appointed inspectors to make sure they are reaching the standards we would expect of people at that particular rank. In addition, I hold a number of other roles, including public order commander. I'm a peer supporter and peer support lead. I'm a TRIM manager and practitioner, which is trauma risk management, post-incident manager, and I'm mental health first aid trained. So I'm involved in a whole lot of areas that can be extremely stressful and can have a big impact, not only on the staff that I'm working with, but indeed on myself as well. So I'm going to talk you through how peer support's been developed within West Yorkshire Police. And by doing that, I hope I'm going to cover why we had a need for peer support, how I managed to gain organisational buy-in, what training we had in place, how it was implemented, and some feedback and some success that we've had with this. So my interest in mental health started back in 2011, but that's a whole different story for a whole different day. But through various personal and work-related experiences, I gained a very good insight and understanding of the impact of mental ill health on people, both in the workplace and at home. So early on, I'll take you back to 2016 now. Early on that year, I had the pleasure to be involved with a workshop which Leeds Mind did for Leeds District of West Yorkshire Police, and that was around blue light training, and it was about supervisor awareness and understanding mental ill health. Just to explain, Leeds District, which is part of West Yorkshire Police, has about 2,000 staff, including police officers and police staff, so quite a big district with a lot of people there who potentially might need some support. So I listened at this session run by Leeds Mind, extremely good session. But I came away thinking to myself, well, most of what I heard, for me, with my background, with my experience, it was kind of common sense, really. But what I did take away from that was that some of our staff really, some of our supervisors didn't quite understand mental ill health. They didn't quite understand how to support people, and quite worryingly at the time, they didn't understand how to speak to their own staff that were struggling with their own mental health. So I came away from this thinking that we needed to do a bit more as an organisation. So I did some research. I spoke to a number of officers who I knew had been off work through mental ill health. And as I'm speaking to these officers, a theme started to emerge, and that theme was they didn't feel able to talk to their own supervisors about how they were feeling. And there were a lot of reasons for that. There was the perceived stigma at the time. There was the fear that it could impact on their jobs as frontline officers. But there was also a concern that supervisors didn't actually understand mental ill health and didn't know how to better to support their staff. So I had to think about this, and I went away and I took this to our Leeds District Equalities Group, who were a group of people, all ranks, all statuses within the organisation, within these districts, who got together on a regular basis to discuss how we could improve things for the staff that we were working with. I raised mental health as an area I felt that we weren't doing enough on at the time. And through that meeting, I agreed to be the Leeds District Lead for Mental Ill Health, which isn't easy to say, actually, the Leeds Lead. So I went away, I had to think about what I wanted to do. I set myself some priorities, and one of those priorities was giving our staff a vehicle through which they could actually speak about how they were feeling, speak about their mental health without any worries, any fears of any effects on careers, etc., etc. So I went back to Leeds Mind, who had given this initial presentation, and we had a chat about peer support, about how it would work, about potential training. And for me, this all seemed like a really, really good idea. So I took this back to my senior leadership team, who mulled it over. And this was where I got a little bit of resistance, because there were some people within our organisation as a whole who felt that potentially peer support could, rather than help staff, it could make things worse in getting them to discuss or inviting them to discuss how they were feeling. And I did kind of get that in a way, but I totally disagreed with it. Fortunately, and this is my first big tip of the day, fortunately, I was lucky enough to have one senior member of my senior leadership team who was really on board with what I was proposing. And I was basically told to crack on and do it, and we would worry about any retribution afterwards. So that was great. So having somebody actually on board who is in a position to get things going and help you out is really key to this. So the next thing I did was I put out an expression of interest amongst our staff to see who would like to be trained as a peer supporter. I was hoping I would get the 15 I needed to for Mind to run some training for us, and I actually got around about 60 volunteers, which really impressed me, really surprised me, because it meant that people were on board already and people felt that there was a genuine need for peer support within the organisation. So from the 60 volunteers, I had to whittle this down a bit to give me 15, well, 14 plus me, because I was always going to be one of the peer supporters. So I had to whittle down 60 to 14. And the way I did this, I wasn't looking for anybody who was qualified in mental health or anything of that nature. What I was looking for were people who had some form of experience with mental ill health, whether it be through themselves, family, through friends, and were actually happy to talk to me about it, or happy to tell me their experiences. My thinking there was, if people were open and had some experience themselves, they'd be able to empathise better with anyone else who was struggling and could effectively put themselves in their shoes and be there to suggest ways that we could help. So I got my little group together, and middle of June 2016, we had our peer support training from Leeds Mind. And that training, I have to say, is the best training that I've ever been on. And that's resonated throughout our organisation. Anybody who has attended these training sessions have said, no matter what the topic, what the subject, this is the best training they've received. And we went through such things as how to understand mental health, how to support colleagues, how to signpost colleagues to different organisations, and really importantly, how to look after ourselves. Obviously, as peer supporters, if we are putting ourselves in the position of wanting to help others, we need to be in the right frame of mind ourselves to actually be able to provide that support. So that was really, really important for me. So we had our training. I then had the 15 of us who were raring to go. And this was where I hit another couple of hurdles, because I kind of hadn't really planned this out too well. I hadn't really thought about the mechanics of how we would receive referrals, how that would work. I'd not really thought about how we would promote it within Leeds District. So what I did, I sat down with our little team of supporters, and we all just had a chat through things. We came up with a really good idea of how referrals could be received into us. And that was quite simply, we instigated an Outlook mailbox, which was totally confidential. The only people that could actually look at that mailbox were the 15 of us, so no one else within the organisation had access to it. So everything coming in we knew would remain confidential, and that did work really well. And in terms of promotion, we did a lot of things. We spoke at team briefings, we spoke at events, we put things on our intranet. But the best thing we ever did, we devised some posters which we put up in all of our workplaces within Leeds. And those posters had our photos on them and our names. And what that meant was anybody who was seeking support could actually know who we were. They could hunt us down, they could find us, and they could ask for support from us individually. So peer support then started to evolve quite a bit. Rather than have referrals coming into the mailbox, we started having conversations on stairs. The posters were really, really helpful for this. We were being stopped in corridors, people asking to have a quick chat with us. There was all sorts of things going on. But I think the most important for me development was that we became very, very proactive. We were, through the training, through our experiences, we were able to spot the signs of when people weren't quite themselves, and we were able to go to them rather than wait for them to come to us and refer themselves to us. We started to actually be proactive and going out and almost looking for people who weren't quite themselves, and that had a massive impact. In terms of results, it's difficult to say really. I lost count of the amount of people that we were supporting, and this is going back to 2018. But what I do know is that Leeds District's absence levels throughout 2018 were the lowest they had ever been, and our senior leadership team openly attributed that to the work that the peer supporters were doing, because we were getting involved in an awful lot there. And this came to the notice of our chief officer team. So the team that actually run West Yorkshire Police as a whole, this came to their notice, and we received some recognitions through that. In 2018, our small peer support group of 15 people were nominated for an award in the West Yorkshire Policing Awards under the category of Outstanding Contribution towards Equality and Diversity, and very much to our surprise we actually won. So we were then, still are, an award-winning peer support group, which was quite nice. Due to that success, due to what could be seen to be going on within Leeds District, the decision was made that peer support, following along the same framework that we had running in our district, would go force-wide. So as a force, we now have over 10,000 police officers and police staff working for us. So as you can probably imagine, there's a lot of scope there for people to need support. So peer support was brought in force-wide. We're still working extremely closely with Leeds Mind on this. Leeds Mind provide the majority of our training. Training's continued even now throughout the pandemic, although it's virtual, but I attend every training session to give Leeds Mind some support there with regards to procedures and background. And I can quite honestly say it being virtual has not affected the quality of the training we are getting from Leeds Mind. We've got a very good structure in place as well. We have a force coordinator who looks after all of the peer supporters. We've got leads in every single department and district who, I suppose, the primary role there is to look at promotion, to look at how referrals are given out to our supporters. So we've had a lot going on. a lot of organisational benefit as well. We brought this in at the same time I introduced something else, which was supervisor mental health awareness, which has now gone force-wide as well. And I think it's really crucial that supervisors understand mental health, because supervisors are a good source of referrals to peer supporters. So it's really, really important that they understand this. So what it provides to our organisation is it's increased awareness, it's an added layer of support, and hopefully it leads to happier and healthier staff, which obviously looks to improve performance and productivity even. That's not an easy word to say at this time of the morning. So that's my story around peer support, and how it has been brought into West Yorkshire Police. I'm going to now introduce some of our other speakers, and I'm going to start off by introducing a presentation we got from Helen Saunders, who is a mental health first aid trainer with Healthy Minds at Leeds City Council.
Morning everybody, thanks for having me. It's a delight to be here. My name is Helen Saunders. I'm the mental health first aid trainer for Leeds City Council and also the chair of the Healthy Minds network. Healthy Minds was founded around 5 years ago within Leeds City Council by Chris Ingham, who is the head of health, safety and wellbeing. In the first instance, it was set up as there were other staff networks within the council, but there wasn't really anything in place to support positive mental health. It started as one peer support session a month. As it got more busier, it started to be 3 sessions a month. So that was after a year. It has evolved in a recognised staff network with a steering group who manage and coordinate the running of Healthy Minds. Each session we have is planned on a specific topic. For example, we have people from various mental health charities. We have people from around the council who are expertise in the field. For instance, we have someone coming to talk about sleep. We have someone to come and talk about nutrition, as well as other issues. As well as peer support sessions, we also hold events, obviously not virtually, although we are holding an event in May during Mental Health Awareness Week. But before, we used to hold events within the banqueting suite in the Civic Hall to raise awareness on relevant mental health dates, such as Mental Health Awareness Day, such as Mental Health Awareness Week. We do work closely with other staff networks, so there's a joint up approach. I also have trained in the council, between the council and schools, over 1,000 mental health first aiders. I don't know if you've heard about Mental Health First Aid England. They are the accredited company to run the mental health first aid course. We started doing this around 3 years ago, and I was brought in to do specifically the training for mental health. We have a group of mental health first aiders, 800 to be precise, within the council, and then we've got about 150 within the schools. These are very, very muchly used. We've also provided a phone line for people in frontline services in case they can't get onto the computer, so that they can access mental health first aiders. The mental health first aiders are specifically there to listen non-judgmentally, and they're also there to signpost people when they're in distress. This has been really, really well backed from the top, and I'm really pleased that, you know, we started this 3 years ago, and I'm really pleased that it has taken off. The Mental Health and the First Aid England, the Mental Health First Aiders and Healthy Minds do work closely to support colleagues within the council. We have, like I've just said, over 800 mental health first aiders. Start of lockdown, so we got together. Obviously we couldn't hold face-to-face meetings, so we got together as a steering group in the Healthy Minds to decide what can we do, how can we get these sessions out, and still operating within a safe and confidential space. So what we did is we went virtual, as many other people did. The more people that we got on the sessions doing it virtual, the more pleased we were, because that was the more people that we were getting out to. It has been successful. There has been frontline workers also accessing these sessions. I do put them on Facebook Live on the Leeds City Council colleagues page, so that if anybody can't get to the session, whether they're being frontline or they're in meetings, they're able to catch up on the sessions afterwards. The advantages of working virtual in lockdown, well, for me, I think it is that we have been able to reach more people. People are not having to travel to sort of city centre, trying to find parking to try to get to one of our sessions, because we used to hold the sessions city centre in the Civic Hall. People are able to view this in their own time. And also, I think what we found as well is that guest speakers who may be a bit nervous talking face to face have got more confidence to talk virtually. Disadvantages of virtual: you can't read people's body language. I've done some training on the mental health first aid side, and that's the only disadvantage I would think, is because when you're having conversations, you can't see somebody, you know, the body language or how they are, or for example, if they phoned up the manager and they were in distress, and you know, you did it through Skype or you did it through Zoom, whichever, you don't quite capture all that. I think it's been difficult virtually as well. To start off with, we had a few technical issues. We managed it in the end, and the group discussions that we usually do have in the Healthy Minds have been limited. The impact of Healthy Minds has been remarkable and given people the space to educate and support themselves. We have a mailing list in the Healthy Minds of over 600 members who welcome regular information, regular emails that we send out. The Healthy Minds and the mental health first aiders. The mental health first aiders are, you know, supported to come to the Healthy Minds sessions. I do put on other sessions for everybody as well. So, for example, it was Eating Disorder Week last week, and it was also World Self-Injury Day. So I did get somebody to come in from a charity to give a talk to everybody about self-injury, self-harm and eating disorders. I think the feedback has been amazing this year from everybody within the organisation. We've had some people saying it's been a lifeline for them. We've had some people saying it's the only support that they've been getting this year. And then, you know, we have supported those people who may be in difficult situations at the moment.
Thanks for that, Helen. Really interesting. Next, I'd like to introduce a presentation from Lucy Chaplin, who is a Senior Communications Officer, and Elizabeth Holdsworth, who is an HR Service Manager with Leeds Trinity University.
Hi, I'm Lucy, Senior Corporate Communications Officer.
Hi, I'm Liz, HR Services Manager.
We work together at Leeds Trinity University, one of the smaller universities in Leeds with approximately 500 staff and 3,500 students based in Holdsworth. Today, we're going to be talking to you about how we established a peer support network during the pandemic and how it's grown over the last 12 months.
So, like everybody else, in March 2020, our campus had to close and the majority of staff moved to home working and teaching online. Wellbeing wasn't a new priority for the university, and we had done some work on it already, but we knew this pandemic meant that we were going to have to do things differently. We needed to think differently, we needed to reach out to more colleagues than before, and we needed to rely on different technology and digital communication methods, but also being mindful that everyone was in a completely unique situation. Previous wellbeing work had concentrated on more of the traditional wellbeing themes of mental wellbeing, physical wellbeing and financial wellbeing. But we knew this time that social wellbeing was going to be a really important part of our agenda that we needed to make sure we covered. And we needed to make sure that our community stayed as strong as it was when we were all based back on campus. So in March, straight away, we got a team together that included colleagues from HR, from our communications team, student support and our students' union. And we had to put a plan together, but was pretty much an unknown few months ahead. but we needed to make sure we put the wellbeing of staff and students at the forefront of the priorities for the next year.
As part of this, we knew we needed to create an engaged online community. We were conscious of a number of principles to guide us with our communications. These included giving people a choice. Wellbeing can't be forced, and we always wanted to create something that was optional for staff. Our online Microsoft Teams page for staff is a voluntary opt-in, but we now have over 270 engaged staff members connected on there, which is around 52% of our workforce. Next, we also recognise that each individual has different experiences and needs and worries. From the person with a full house with the pressures of homeschooling and not a moment of quiet time, to the person who is isolated alone with limited contact to other people, we knew never to assume there was a one-size-fits-all approach, and we've used a variety of methods to ensure that we signpost colleagues to the help and support we have to offer. Next was diverse methods of communication. We knew that staff and students had different needs, as well as different communications preferences, and as such we reached out to them in a variety of ways, from weekly emails, virtual challenges, postal cards, newsletter updates, social media takeovers, Microsoft Teams, video messages, e-cards, blogs, a wellbeing survey and live Q&As. We've wanted to ensure people are aware of wellbeing and that we were meeting their needs as much as possible. Next came identifying stakeholders, and we brought in many other colleagues from across the university to help keep momentum going and promote an all-round approach towards wellbeing, and to ensure the wellbeing narrative remained diverse and engaging. From the fitness team doing virtual classes and sports challenges, psychologists sharing working from home tips, a friendly video message from colleagues in domestic services, to the star bakers uploading their recipes, this really brought the community together. The counselling team has also created weekly relaxations for staff and students to use, which have been accessed by more than 400 people. Next came asking our audience questions. We always checked in with our staff and student body to ensure we were helping and taking on feedback. There would be no point in assuming and doing wellbeing work if we weren't asking our audience what they wanted. The results of our staff health, safety and wellbeing survey also showed that we were on track, with 88% of respondents knowing where to access wellbeing resources should they need them. This also worked well in reverse when hosting Instagram Live Q&A takeovers with a wide range of student support professionals. Students were able to submit questions anonymously and receive instant, impactful feedback or support and further signposting where necessary. After this has come executive endorsement to reassure our community that health, safety and wellbeing is a priority, and we've involved our exec team in wellbeing activity with video messages and also more recently a blog reflecting on how they've tried to support their wellbeing during the last 12 months. Lastly, it's all about being human. We didn't want Trinity Wellbeing to feel like another formal or corporate piece of messaging. It was about real connection and sharing experiences amongst our community, and to encourage them it's safe for them to do so too. As a result, we've seen colleagues share their own experiences and feelings, from writing blogs for our university website or sharing a video or message in Teams. It's really created an authentic two-way conversation that allows us to engage with and better understand how our community are feeling and what support they need.
Throughout our work on wellbeing, we've used the 5 ways to wellbeing as a starting point for our challenges, communications and initiatives. I'm sure you're all very aware of these. So there's connect, be active, take notice, learn and give. We use these principles to allow us to think about wellbeing from a variety of angles and making sure that the Leeds Trinity community was also collaborating and staying connected with the wider Holdsworth community. We wanted our challenges to be inclusive of all of our members and making sure that we didn't just put all our efforts into one certain strand, such as physical wellbeing. As we've said before, we needed to reach out to everybody. So we can now show you some examples of some initiatives that we've done, and hopefully you can see how these connect to the 5 ways to wellbeing. So in terms of physical wellbeing, we've done many challenges such as virtual relays where everyone had to submit times and people were working in teams together. We've done active minutes to make sure that it wasn't just for those runners, for example. Active minutes can be running around the house after young children, doing some housework. It can be anything. We've also had online fitness classes by our fitness team, Trinity Fitness. We've done some creative challenges, including photography and mindfulness challenges. We've had virtual bake-offs and we've had pumpkin carving. We've also had a really successful festive fortnight where many of our colleagues came together to show off what skills they had, from wreath making, festive recipes. We even had a Christmas jumper day competition still, even though we couldn't be all together. We've recently had a Be Kind campaign where we had a virtual e-card that all of our colleagues could send to each other just to give some positive words. And it really went down well, that people could just give a positive message to each other. We've also used some of our initiatives to make sure, as we've said before, we are engaging with our local community. So before Christmas, we donated more than 500 isolation packs to vulnerable people living in Holdsworth. And this was a project that was driven by one of our academic staff in our psychology department. The pack included resources from information on looking after themselves to some sweet treats and also a rainbow picture. And that part went down really well, and we can still walk around Holdsworth now and see residents who have proudly displayed the rainbow on their windows to make themselves feel like part of the community too. We also didn't want to stop supporting campaigns that we had done previously. So every year, Leeds Trinity has supported the Mission Christmas campaign to donate gifts for children who might go without at Christmas. So we obviously couldn't do that this year. So instead, we set up a fundraising page and we managed to raise over £1,000 that we could donate for the money to be spent on our behalf.
So, where do we go next? We will continue to use feedback from the Wellbeing Survey, community suggestions and social media engagement to shape and improve future wellbeing provision. We will maintain a diverse approach to wellbeing, recognising that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, keep it varied and reflective of everybody's needs. We'll keep using social media takeovers and live Q&As to engage with our students on wellbeing and to receive feedback. As we hopefully begin to return working on campus, we'll need to monitor and adjust our approach as restrictions lift. We acknowledge the challenges of digital fatigue and ways of engaging community and wellbeing without screens or technology, as we're all feeling pretty screened out. And lastly, we'll empower and motivate staff to take ownership of their own wellbeing.
So that comes to the end of our presentation. Thank you ever so much for all of you for listening, and we hope we've given you a few ideas that you might be able to implement in your own workplaces. If you've got any questions and if there is time, we'd be more than happy to answer them for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy and Elizabeth. Some really good stuff going on there at Leeds Trinity University. So our next speaker, who I'd like to introduce, is Doherty, who is the Peer Support Team Leader with Leeds Mind.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the introduction, John, and thank you to the organisers of the event for asking me to be here today. It's quite nerve-wracking, so I will try and do this without bumbling over my words too much. And as John mentioned, I'm Doherty. I'm the Wellbeing Team Leader here at Leeds Mind, and I've got responsibility for a number of statutory and non-statutory peer support services, and today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about how peer support can work in the workplace. So I'm just going to share, hopefully, a presentation with you this morning, if everything goes to plan. So hopefully everybody can see my presentation, and so I'm just going to go through this with you. So obviously, peer support in the workplace. So what is peer support? So quite often people talk about peer support as if they know exactly what it is, but actually there's various different kinds of models of peer support that exist. And we use a very specific model at Leeds Mind, but what we think the best way of thinking about peer support is thinking about the ethos and the principles that actually underpin peer support, rather than getting bogged down in a particular model, because different services use different models. So when we're talking about principles and ethos, we're thinking about things like it not being hierarchical, so there being mutuality in the room, so everybody is on an equal footing. It's about shared experience, so people sharing their thoughts, feelings, experiences of difficulties of, in our instance, mental health, rather than getting into detail, so it's what we call experiential. At Leeds Mind as well, all our groups are developed by and run by as well service users. So that's really helpful that we get the input from them as to what works for peer support. It's not about advice giving, so peer support isn't about giving advice. It's not you need to, you have to. It's I'm sharing my lived experience and you will take away from that what you resonate with. And so somebody might share something about a coping mechanism that's worked for them, and you might think, oh, I really kind of like the sound of that, and you go away and you try that yourself. It's not somebody telling you what you need to do, and it's about it being safe, so a safe environment where people can come and share their mental health difficulties without being told what to do. It's non-judgmental, so people are not asking you questions to explain, they're listening, you're being heard. Other people are sharing as well, so it's a real two-way process that's based on respect and mutuality, and there's no hierarchy. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about peer support. So the benefits of peer support in the workplace are numerous, as you can probably imagine, but one of the main things about peer support is that you're creating a safe space for people in the workplace to be able to be able to speak to other people in their workplace and get that sense of understanding and linking in with people who might have a very similar experience to them. So it reduces isolation, it increases connections. So you're talking to somebody who you know gets or has some understanding of what you're talking about, and you're able to do that within the workplace. So it's creating a safe space to be able to connect with others. And because it reduces isolation, there's that feeling that people understand where you're coming from as well. So you're not at work thinking, oh, nobody understands what I'm talking about. There is that sense of understanding. And one of the other benefits as well as having that safe space to reduce isolation and make connections is that actually it does look at increasing productivity and reduces sickness. I think John mentioned in his presentation when he was talking about peer support within West Yorkshire Police that actually it had a really positive impact on sickness and reducing sickness, and that is something that we definitely see within peer support and within Leeds Mind, is that you've got somebody who, or several people who you can talk to who get what you're going through, so you're not having to hide or even lie about your thoughts and feelings and your mental health difficulties, because you know that there's people in the workplace who understand it. There's a lack of judgment, it's a safe space, and if we're creating environments within the workplace where people can be open and honest about their mental health difficulties, then you're not having to perhaps ring up and say, oh, I've got sickness and diarrhea, or I've got a migraine. You can actually speak about, actually, my mental health is not in a great place today. And then you're able to speak through that with your team leaders and colleagues, and you feel more supported to be able to stay at work without having to take time off. So there's actually quite a lot of benefits of peer support within the workplace. So it's really important to think about how peer support can work or can look in the workplace, because that will vary from workplace to workplace. So one of the main ways in which peer support can work in the workplace, or look in the workplace rather, is that it can be delivered on a one-to-one basis. And that can be that you have a lead or a champion, so somebody who really understands what peer support is, they've got a good understanding of mental health difficulties, so that when that person comes to speak to them, again, you're putting people together who understand. So we don't have exactly the same life experiences, but if you've got an understanding of anxiety or depression or any kind of other mental health difficulty, then you know that when you're speaking to someone, they may not have had the exact experience, but they have a level of understanding of how you might be feeling. So if you have a lead or a champion with that understanding, again, you know that you're speaking to somebody who it's a safe space and they're not going to judge you. So that's how it can look in one aspect, is that one-to-one. So that could be on a drop-in basis, or it could be that the champion or lead has so many appointments available and you book in with them. So if you know that you would benefit from speaking to a peer support lead, you can either attend the drop-in and have that one-to-one chat with them, or you can pre-arrange. So the little figure in the middle of the star is highlighting the fact that you need that champion, you need that person who is the go-to person, or people in the workplace with that understanding. And another way in which peer support can work is groups. So some people really benefit from one-to-one support, but some people really benefit more for peer support being in a group setting. And that's where everybody in the group is sharing their thoughts, feelings and experiences around mental health difficulties. So you'll have the champion or the lead of peer support within your workplace leading that group. So we would always want what we in Leeds Mind call them facilitators. So it could again be a lead or a champion. So they would be leading that, and everybody in that group then attends, and they are attending on the agreement that they're willing and able to be open and share about the mental health difficulties. And they're going to listen to everybody. Everybody's going to have that safe space to be heard, to share what they're going through. And other people in that group are all going to participate as well. So they're not going to respond to anybody in the group and be like, oh, you need to, you should, you want to do X, Y, and Z. It will be, I had a similar experience, this is what I did. And then everybody's taken away from that, what they want to put into practice themselves. So peer support is about promoting choice, it's non-prescriptive. So if you're going into a group and everybody's talking about different ways in which they've coped with their mental health, nobody's saying this is what you've got to do. It's about choice and empowerment. You take away from the group what you want. And equally, you get that on a one-to-one basis as well. So we, again, it's always based as to how we run in Leeds Mind, but within Leeds Mind, our peer support is very much everybody shares. So our facilitators, our volunteers, our staff, they share an appropriate amount of their mental health, and that's how you create the mutuality and the kind of one-to-one, everybody benefiting each other. So in the workplace, you might have it in a one-to-one basis, or you might have it in a group, and it will depend on what the your peers in the workplace actually need. So things to kind of think about and to consider if you are thinking about introducing peer support in the workplace is who is going to be the lead or the champion or the facilitator of your peer support. So have you got somebody in the workplace already who's got a really good understanding of mental health difficulties? Have they had mental health training of any kind? Do they actually understand what peer support is? Do they have an interest in peer support and mental health? And if so, there's all those practical questions then about their capacity and their availability, how that sits within the role, how you can free them up. So that's one of the things to consider when thinking about peer support within the workplace. And also kind of the time that takes as well. So are you is it going to be one-to-one? Is it going to be a drop-in? Is it going to be group? And is that going to be within work time? So you're freeing your staff up to be able to attend? Is it before work, after work, during the day? Is it going to be at different times of the day if it's a group or a drop-in or one-to-one? Again, how are you going to build that into the workplace so that, because obviously some services have got different working structures where people are on shifts and on rota. So how do you put that in place so everybody has an equal and equitable opportunity to be able to access peer support within the workplace? And is it going to be online? Obviously, we're all working very differently at the moment. So is it going to be online if your services and organisations are face-to-face? Have you got a safe space in which people are able to meet and they're not feeling conscious that when they're going into a room that everybody's going to be like, oh, they're going into peer support, that everybody feels like it's a safe space, non-judgmental. And also going back to who's going to be the peer support lead or champion, what is their role within the organisation? And is it a role in which people will feel comfortable approaching? So even though peer support is mutual, there's non-hierarchical. If it were your CEO, for example, would everybody in the organisation feel comfortable to seek out peer support if it was their team leader, an operations manager, the CEO? These things shouldn't be barriers to accessing peer support, but it's something that you very much need to take into consideration when you're looking at implementing peer support in the workplace, because we want peer support to benefit as many people in the workplace as possible. So having to think about who is going to be leading and championing and accessing are all things to be taken into consideration. So that, in a very kind of quick nutshell, is peer support within the workplace. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ros. That was great, and actually had me reminiscing and getting me all excited again about peer support. Yeah, great. Thank you for that. So next, I'd like to introduce Andrea Wood. Andrea has a Master of Science degree in Public Health.
Hi there. Yeah, as John said, I'm Andrea, and I'm going to be delivering a brief presentation today on my evaluation that I undertook on behalf of Leeds Mind and Leeds Mindful Employer and Leeds Public Health. And I did this on behalf of my Masters in Public Health and Health Promotion at Leeds University. So we're having some technical difficulties, which is just typical for me. So I'm having to do next slide. Someone's pressing the clicker for me. So next slide, please, Stephen. So just a little bit of brief information about the study. Next bit. So the aims and objectives of the study that I undertook were to explore employers' perspectives of mindful employer leads, with particular reference to the peer support element of the network, which is what we'll focus on today. Additionally, how the mindful employer 10 steps toolkit was utilised within the workplace, and also how being a mindful employer influenced or had influence on stigma and discrimination in the workplace. Next bit. So 8 participants were recruited, so 8 employers were recruited from public, private and the voluntary sector. And one-to-one interviews were undertaken to comply on a virtual level, to comply with public health guidance at the time, with obviously the coronavirus pandemic lockdown. So these one-to-one interviews were approximately an hour and 15 minutes long, so quite in-depth interviews were carried out. And these were transcribed by myself and then thematically analysed to present the following key themes, which is the next slide. So the first key theme is knowledge and attitude. So this theme identified that stigma and discrimination around mental health is obviously experienced within the workplace, but that interventions that focus on a multifaceted approach, such as educational, peer support, and an organisational top-down approach, such as policy change. Collectively, these all contributed to having some effectiveness in reducing stigma and discrimination within the workplace. The second theme, which is the network, which is again specifically what we'll talk about in a moment, identified that the communication between organisations demonstrated value, particularly during the coronavirus pandemic lockdown, and it also provided opportunity for sharing best practice and for increasing partnership working. The third theme, which is organisational policies and procedures. This theme explored how organisations have developed and implemented changes to perhaps absence, sickness procedures, return to work, implementing wellbeing strategies. All these different organisational changes were to embed a cultural shift and to support the longer term sustainability of mental health and wellbeing of employees. And lastly, the last theme was engagement and activity. This theme explored the importance of employee buy-in and support and the challenges to sustaining employee engagement, as well as the various activities that employers have delivered and implemented within their workplace. These range from awareness days to fundraising and wellbeing events. Next slide, please. So the 4 key points, which you can pop up straight away, Stephen. Thank you. The 4 key points of the network were the effectiveness of the network in supporting employers through various approaches, such as the resources, the Mindful Employee Coordinator, but as well as the diversity of organisations and how they are able to support one another. We also talk about the experiences of employers' experiences, of both the face-to-face networking meetings, which were obviously taking place prior to the lockdown, but also the online webinars and sessions that have been facilitated during the lockdown, and how these forums have created opportunity for the sharing of best practice, but also how employers have identified the benefits of the peer support element of the network and how this has been transferable within their workplace, and how they've encouraged the facilitation and the delivery of more peer support work within their own organisation. So next slide, please. So Stephen, you can pop all the three snapshots up for me, thank you. So I've just included a few snapshots of employers' perspectives, and the general consensus from all the participants was the accessibility and the diverse support of the network through the various avenues. The study identified the understanding of how organisations in different workforces manage certain challenges, and that listening to other organisations' experiences, case studies that they presented, served as a standard of practice, and that these were relatable, provided creative and relevant content, which they were able to then replicate in some way within their own organisation. So these challenges were sometimes how they could support their employees going through bereavement or addiction. They were able to access, obviously, the face-to-face network sessions, or specifically the online sessions, and discuss the challenges that they were facing, and hear how other organisations that perhaps have been part of Mindful Employer for some time have tackled those challenges within their own workplace. So it provided validation for employers that they were not alone in the difficulties that they were encountering within their organisations, and how to manage and effectively implement certain interventions in order to support their employees. But also the network itself and the various online and face-to-face events were also opportunities to celebrate the successes, to discuss how effective some of their interventions have been, and to celebrate those successes. Next slide, please. Again, you can pop all the snapshots of perspectives up for me, thank you. Thanks. So employers also discussed the conversations that they've had with other organisations through the network, and that the sharing of ideas and practice has been interesting. It's been reassuring and very insightful, being able to share knowledge through the various networks, understanding and learning some practical guidance for behaviour change around tackling stigma and discrimination, or engaging employees and having that buy-in. Participants found the value in the Mindful Employee Coordinator, but also found the support from various organisations useful in strengthening the multi-agency engagement and creating space for some dialogue and difference. It also, a lot of employees found having the discussions with other organisations, specifically during the coronavirus pandemic lockdown, is quite empowering, listening to other people's difficulties and how they were able to support people going through some very challenging times. They did find very empowering, listening to other people's experiences, collectively sharing the difficulties that they faced, and having the direct empathy and experience for those. And next slide. Again, you can just pop up both perspectives. There you go. So, as well as also finding these opportunities to listen to what other people were going through, it was also quite educational. The networks, employers are finding the network quite educational in terms of understanding more around how people manage their own mental health as an employer, as well as obviously how to support their employees within the workplace. And lastly, next slide, please. With both perspectives up, thank you very much. Lastly, employers have found, because of the benefits that they've got from the network itself, they've noticed how that is transferable within their own organisation. They've also noticed how they've also supported more of a peer support approach within their organisation because of their own experiences within the network. They've supported their colleagues, they've supported their employees in becoming mental health first aiders and wellbeing champions in order to provide more of a person-centred approach within the workplace, in order to foster an environment where people are able to openly talk about their own experiences, in order to provide that environment where people feel comfortable about talking about mental health. Yeah, thank you. Next slide. That's it. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Andrea. Some really interesting stuff there that resonated with me. Absolutely. Okay, we're going to take a short break now. During the break, if you want to continue to put any questions you might have into the chat box, and we can answer those when we come back. It's 5 to 11 now. If we take a 5-minute break and come back at 11 o'clock, and we will see you all then. So welcome back, everybody. We've had some really interesting presentations, I think, already around peer support and how we can help others. We're now moving on to what is going to be the really nerve-wracking thing for us all, the question and answer session. So feel free to pop your questions in the chat, and we will answer them as best we can. So a question for me to start with. Sounds like a real long-term culture change, which is brilliant, not just a sticking plaster on the problem. That's from memory. Yeah, absolutely. It needed to be long-term, and that was always in my mind, that we needed something that was going to be put into the organisation that would be there to stay. So it needed to be right from the outset. And again, I'm going to sing Leeds Mind's praises here, because we just could not have done it without the support they gave us. So yeah, thank you for that, Emily. So a question from Hannah: how can we ensure that our peer support lead within an organisation is also receiving any help and support they need? I'll open this up to the floor if anybody wants to chip in here.
Yeah, I don't mind. So I think it's really important that the staff member has regular supervision. So Helen in the backstage was talking about clinical supervision, and I think also regular supervision. And within Leeds Mind, we do a pre-brief and a debrief, so staff and volunteer peer support facilitators can check in before and after, and that would be with a team leader, so there's always somebody about so they can speak to. But I think also training is really important. So one thing that I didn't mention was prior to kind of going into any peer support is having peer support training, because it's very specific and it is different to kind of any other support, and without the training, staff can kind of quickly inadvertently become like counsellors, or it moves into therapy, which it's not. So I think it's really important to have training and then regular supervision, check-ins and reflective practice. Yeah, thanks for that. I can add to that as well. From my point of view, I've actually received support myself from our peer supporters, who have noticed that I've not been quite myself at various times, and they've actually asked me if I'm okay, which quite often is all it needs. But I'm also been very lucky with the support I get from my own line managers. Wherever I've been, it's been great, and they're always there, and I know that if I need help, I can go straight to them. So thanks for that question, Hannah. Next question, this one is on gender. Is there an equal split? I have a feeling that we'd struggle to get men to join some of these groups. Do you have any tips on engaging men specifically? That's from Frank. Does anybody want to answer that one for Frank?
I can come in with something with that, I think. From our experience at Leeds Trinity University, we've actually had really good engagement across the board. I'm thinking of examples that we've had in the last few weeks even. Our executive team wrote a blog on wellbeing at home during the pandemic, both male and both being very honest about how they found working from home and things that they've changed to try and make things better for their own wellbeing. The second example is a colleague that works in our alumni office. He also felt strongly that he wanted to write something about how he'd found one of our physical challenges helping him with his own well-being. So I think because we've created a really encouraging and supportive culture within our workplace, that's actually really helped our male colleagues to open up as well, and our female colleagues. I think it's actually been a really even split. But the way we achieved that, I think, was just being very open and honest and having those genuine conversations in the first steps, and making it driven by our staff and understanding what they really wanted and needed to create that dynamic.
Can I come in there as well?
Yep.
I think, as you know, I mean, our chief executive has been on this conference, and he talks openly about his own mental health and his own struggles, what he's had with family and friends. And we in the council have also set up a men's wellbeing group, which is going really well, and that gives men the safe space to talk in front of other men.
Yeah, really good idea, I think. Really good idea. Hopefully that's answered Frank's question. Next question. This one's from Liv. As part of a small business, I'd be really curious to know how you'd recommend small businesses without HR departments, etc., can go about setting up a peer support network. Who would like to answer that one for Liv?
I can come in from Leeds Trinity, and then I'm sure there'll be more to add. So it's an interesting point, actually, because wellbeing is often seen as something that's driven from the HR department, and it might be if there is someone with a specific position to look after it, they sit within HR. But for wellbeing to really thrive within an institution, it has to be an organisation-wide approach. So I would say that you don't necessarily need a HR department, as we've covered in our slides. So you do need buy-in from the top. But I would say start small. So we haven't got to this point overnight. It is something that's developed from listening to our staff and really getting feedback. We've done some initiatives that haven't worked. So it's really listening and making sure you're working with your colleagues. So you're all moving in the right direction. I'd also say, again, if it's something that you don't have a specific team that can drive it, it's really important to get your managers trained up. And there are some wonderful companies out there that can train up managers on wellbeing. But again, if you don't have, say, even budget for that, you'd be amazed what colleagues you find out, your own colleagues, the skills that they've got that they're willing to share with other people. So we've got somebody who's a master in Tai Chi. We've got other people who are experts in other wreath making at Christmas, we found out, and just the social interaction there, it's all free, and people just to share skills. As much as it may seem very informal, the social wellbeing aspect is a massive part that really does help people. So yeah, as I say, buy-in from the top, start small, listen to your colleagues, but it certainly, I think the big point is I don't think it is just a HR agenda to move forward. So yeah, it's for everybody to be accountable for wellbeing.
Does anybody else want to chip in with that?
I think I'd just second what Elizabeth said there. It's about getting the buy-in from the top. And I think also using those people within your organisation, like she's just said there about, you found out about Tai Chi masters, about wreath makers, and there is a lot of people in the organisation who you don't know what they do out of work. So about getting to know your colleagues and maybe using their resources to build up your peer support.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly with you both. When we set this up initially in West Yorkshire Police, we obviously do have quite a large HR department. They had no involvement whatsoever. It was actually, we got the buy-in there from our senior leadership team, but then it was driven from the ground upwards. It wasn't the senior leadership team saying this is what we're going to do. It was us, the people, if you like, on the workplace that were saying this is what we need to do, and we did it. So hopefully that answers your question. Next question. So what are the potential pitfalls that people should be aware of? What does bad practice in peer support look like? Who wants to start on this one?
John, I don't mind. I'll try and keep it short because I think this answer could be really long. But I think bad practice is people who are talking about themselves at length, not listening, and the peer support becoming about them, asking a lot of questions, being quite judgmental in their response, lots of giving advice. And so basically doing all the opposite things of what peer support is, which is listening, being empathic, not trying to rescue people, not trying to solve the problems for them, then it becoming about them and talking about their problems. So yes, we expect people to share about their own lived experience, but it should be when it's going to be of benefit to the person who is seeking out the support, and should be appropriate in detail and in length. So that's pretty much kind of what bad practice would look like. And I think one of the pitfalls can be that quite often we're in these well, we're in this industry because we care about people, we want to make a difference, and people can become peer supporters because they want to make a difference, but that can often then become they're taking it home, they're becoming bogged down by other people's problems, not seeking support themselves, and taking on too much, not realising when their own mental health might be then being kind of negatively impacted by listening to other people. So I think going back to the question about how then does somebody get support, if you've got all those things in place, it should be that the peer support leads can then kind of flag when they're having a difficult time. But I think people, when they're not seeking support, that can obviously then become an issue, or people who then take the peer support to be a bit more of a counselling session, or it becomes therapy, and it's moving away from that mutual kind of one-on-one, or what's the word, a mutual exchange of support. When it's moving away from that, that can be bad practice and pitfalls. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's about knowing and understanding your boundaries and the nature of the role. We're not here to act as counsellors. We are here to listen and to signpost, and that's what it's all about. Did anybody else want to chip in at all?
If I can just add on that, John, so completely agree with everything you've said. And again, a big word we'll use with more of our training managers is around the boundaries. So it's sometimes that, yeah, of course, peer support doesn't start taking on the role of a line manager. And also, like you've said, that the peer support doesn't take over the professionals. So we obviously have informal peer support. We have trained mental health first aiders, but we're very clear that the boundaries are there to signpost. We're not qualified medical practitioners. We're there to signpost, like a physical first aider wouldn't be expected to fix a broken leg. So we're quite clear about boundaries to make sure we don't go down any wrong paths and bad practice, like you say.
Absolutely. Okay, next question. I'm going to bring Andrew into it now, because there is a question. Oh, look, there we go. Question for Andrew. Did the research participants talk about anything further that the Mindful Employer Network could offer that isn't already being provided?
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one because of the fact that I only interviewed 8 participants. The overall consensus was that the network was really supportive in terms of the Mindful Employer Coordinator, the various resources, both, like I mentioned in my slides, both the online networking events that were facilitated during the lockdown and the face-to-face. I would say probably what people had expressed potentially was the opportunity for organisations to perhaps collaborate on some of the work that they're doing. So although there was the opportunity to share their experiences that happened within, obviously, the formalities of the network, when I posed the question around have organisations collaborated on any work with regards to mental health and wellbeing, that hadn't seemed to have started. But again, some of my participants were relatively new to Mindful Employer, so we're just getting everything off the ground. We're just starting to try and implement some aspects of the 10 Steps toolkit. So it's a tricky one, really. But I think going forward, I think that would be really beneficial if organisations were able to collaborate on events and just any work that they are trying to implement within their own organisations.
Great stuff, Andrea. So I'd like tips on how to convince senior managers that this is something important that should be supported, and that's come from John. That's not me, by the way. I'm not asking myself a question. Does anybody want to answer that one? Right, shall I chip in initially then on this? Yeah, for me, it actually wasn't, I was going to say it wasn't difficult, but it kind of was, because we have a lot of senior managers in our organisation who all have an interest, a vested interest in what goes on in different districts and in the police as a whole. So for me, it was about, I suppose, finding that one person who I knew would totally understand and totally get what I was trying to do and get them on side. Unfortunately, that was quite easy, because as soon as you've got one senior manager, I think, who does understand it. And it might mean that you've got to spend time with them explaining the benefits, explaining what it is. As soon as you've got that one senior manager on side, then the world's your oyster, really. But the difficulty is, I think, you really do need to explain the role of a peer supporter. With us initially, there was a worry because something similar had been tried, I understand, years ago, which didn't quite work, and there was a worry which stemmed from our RHU department initially, that potentially untrained peer supporters, which is what they saw us as untrained peer supporters, getting people to open up about experiences could bring about PTSD, which, as we all know, is not the case, because that's not what peer support is about. But it was kind of overcoming that obstacle by explaining exactly what peer support was, explaining the limitations of it, explaining exactly what we would do, and that we would stick to listening and signposting where necessary, and we would not go beyond that remit. So yeah, I think it's really is important to just try and get that one person who is on side, who can then, if you like, sell it to the rest of the senior managers in your organisations.
I would also say, not to be a bit cynical, but it's also about selling it for senior managers, isn't it? Like explaining to them what are the benefits, how is it going to benefit the service. So, you know, the benefits say that resilience of staff increases, sickness reduces, productivity increases, and that can sound really kind of a bit cynical, that we only want to do things for these benefits. But actually, some senior managers will really want to know kind of the concrete benefits to it. So I think, you know, we all want a happier workforce, and I'm sure all senior managers do, but when it breaks down to it, what are the actual benefits? And I think it's just, you know, reiterating that sickness is going to decrease, all those things that managers are kind of interested in, really, as well as a happier workforce. And, you know, happy workforce makes it better for everybody in the workplace, surely.
Yeah, for us, one of the unforeseen benefits that we soon realised was that because people felt more comfortable talking about mental health, what we were finding, certainly in Leeds, when we're looking at the statistics, although the number of people who were actually off sick was going down, the number of people that were off sick due to mental health was going up. So what that told us was that people were now happier to actually say, yeah, I'm off because I'm not feeling myself. I'm off through stress. I'm off through depression, and not having to say I'm off through flu. And the benefit of that was that we could then focus our efforts on how we supported those people further, and not just thinking, oh, we've got a flu epidemic here. It was actually stress and other mental health related illnesses. So that was an unforeseen benefit for us. So next question then, do you think digital channels will continue as a way of providing peer support, or will we return to face-to-face? I have my own distinct views on this, but I'm going to open it up to you all.
I can start that one by saying that I think they will continue in some way to offer support. However, in our last monthly wellbeing email that we did, we'd found out that our colleagues were really feeling digitally fatigued, and they were really much welcoming the opportunity to kind of receive wellbeing support through other channels, not just those that are digital. So we have tried to vary things up and send out postal cards as well, just so they're actually getting some physical information from us rather than looking at a screen. I think for things like today, it's great because you can connect lots of people in one space very easily, and there isn't travel involved. But I do think now, from our experience, certainly at Leeds Trinity, that people are wanting that support in person where possible, and that social interaction as well.
I think we've done the same at Leeds Council. Being digital has been absolutely brilliant because you can get out to everybody during, you know, the pandemic and the last year, and people have said it's been a lifeline. You know, it's been really, really good support. But I think a lot of people are wanting that face-to-face peer support.
After you.
Oh, sorry, John. Yeah, I was just going to add, I think it needs to be a blended approach going forward, because actually there's quite a lot of people who were digitally excluded who can't access peer support online. And so I think definitely Leeds to mind, we are having conversations about how we offer both going forward. And so people who would never travel across town and come to us can continue to access us online. But actually, you know, like already being said, there's a lot of people craving social interaction and that human connection that you don't get online. So I think yeah, I think a blended approach of both going forward would be probably the new norm for a lot of people.
Yeah, you've stolen my thunder there, so I'm a little bit disappointed, but that's okay. I'll chip in before you next time. Yeah, I think that when you're talking about mental health and you're looking to support somebody, there is nothing better than sitting down with them with a cup of tea and just having a chat. However, yeah, blended approach. So as I said, we've got over 10,000 people in our organisation. A lot of those work shifts. So a lot of them will be a night shift. So it's sometimes really, really difficult to actually sit down and have that chat. But if you've got then the backup of Teams or Skype or Zoom or whichever you want to use as kind of a secondary method if needed, that is great. And if there's one thing this pandemic has given us, it's the understanding that this technology is here and it can be useful. So so yeah, that's my views anyway. So next question, how do you put in boundaries for peer supporters to make sure that they know where their roles start and end? Anybody?
I can come back on this one quickly. I've mentioned it before, but it's there's a lot of training in there, certainly at Leeds Trinity. So as much as, yes, we've done a lot of the wellbeing work, we've also put a lot of work into training our managers. And for example, mental health first aiders, you know, that they're all trained, so they do know what their role is and about the signposting. And it's, I guess there isn't an exact science, but I guess that is where the HR team does come into play. That a certain, you know, a colleague isn't taking too much on and taking too much over the role of a line manager or a medical practitioner. But it's just got to be clear training, I'd say, from our point of view.
I agree.
Sorry, go on.
I agree, training. We've also, apart from mental health first aiders within the organisations, we've got wellbeing champions as well, who go through, you know, training, and we've trained them all up to be able to, you know, signpost. So I agree with you there, training.
Yeah, and I think there has to be an element of oversight. So with us, I'm one of our peer support leads, so I will have responsibility for a team of peer supporters, and for that it's really down to me to understand what they are doing without going into details, because we don't discuss confidentiality of anybody that's being supported. But it's just making sure in my mind that I know that they're not going outside their boundaries, which has happened before. It's happened for the right reasons, but it shouldn't have happened. So I've been able to pull things back there a little bit. So yeah, it's just about understanding and training, most definitely, as you said.
But John, I think as well, the other thing that can help that is having a role description. So even though it's a voluntary role, additional to your paid role, having some kind of job description really helps people, because, you know, like you say, sometimes those boundaries slip, even with training and even with job descriptions, but then you can refer back to and be like, this is why we don't want you to be doing X, Y, and Z, and this is why we want you to do A, B, C. It's within your role, you've gone over your role.
Yeah, you're right. And we've got our own intranet site for our peer supporters. And on that site, we've actually got a boundaries, a job description type role profile. So that's available not only for peer supporters to see, but also the people we're supporting can clearly see what we're about and what we can and can't do. So yeah, you're quite right, Ros. That is really useful. So next question is from Karen. So is it about senior managers giving up some control and trusting staff to get on with things and do this for themselves? Who wants to open on that? Oh, is it going to be me? Okay. It's quite an interesting and difficult question, that one. I would say yes and no. And the reason I'm going to say yes and no is because senior managers will always want to have control over what goes on in their organisation, and I totally understand that, and it's kind of as it should be. However, they do need to take a step back when it comes to peer support to a degree, because peer support, as we all know, is really confidential. So the staff providing that support have to be trusted to be doing the right things for the people they are supporting. And I think that is really, really essential. However, senior managers will want to know that the support we're giving is good. So there's got to be some kind of recording mechanism. We brought into play a system which really just tells senior managers how many people we are supporting, and that is it. It doesn't go into any specifics. It doesn't go in fact, the only thing it does ask from memory is it work related or home related, and that is it. That's the only question we ask. So they don't get details of names, they don't get details of exactly what the difficulties that are being experienced, how discussions are going. It's just statistics on how many we are supporting. And the reason for that is because obviously they need to justify that the money they are putting into peer support, from our point of view, it's serving a purpose and it is justified. So it's, again, I'm going to go back to my yes and no answer on that one, which is quite bizarre, a bit of a politician's answer almost, isn't it? Anyone want to back me up or disagree with me on that?
I completely agree, and yeah, it's an interesting question. Again, I'd say it's not about giving up the control, it's about empowering your staff and getting it up there on the high priorities of your organisation, getting it in your strategic plan up there as the well-being, and then it goes through the entire organisation. But it's not giving up control. They have to be involved, they have to lead from the top, but empower the staff with the knowledge to do the job.
Yeah, you put that much more eloquently than I ever could, so thank you for that.
That's why I went second. Think about it.
Have we got another question there? Okay, so are there some tips to establish a more informal peer support system in the workplace? Does it work having drop-ins or informal chats in the break room?
We do at the council, we do how are you feeling sessions. So that's once a week. So that's for anybody who wants to attend on different topics. And that's informal. That's, that's not professional. We also do how are you feeling for managers as well, because we've realised that managers are usually the first point of call. So we've been doing them. I've been doing the how are you feeling sessions for school staff. They're all informal. You're free to drop in, drop out at any point and ask whatever you need to do. And I think that's been really, really important to our staff through all this.
Yeah, it's a really good answer to that. Thank you. Anybody else?
I was just going to add that at our workplace, we've done virtual coffee mornings, just for people to drop in, similar to what you've done at the council. Come along and say hi, have a 20-minute chat with people across the university that they'd normally have just met walking down the corridor, say, pre-COVID. And that's been really good for new starters as well, because I think a big point we've had is making sure that our new starters have felt engaged with our kind of community during this time as well, because they've not had the full kind of Leeds Trinity experience yet. So that's something we've done, which has worked quite well in an informal way. And I know that other teams have also set up things like water cooler channels on their teams' pages, where things you'd have conversations about whilst filling up your water bottle or kind of making up a cup of tea, kind of programs you're watching, books you're reading. They've kind of set up things like that where they can have conversations that they'd normally have in the workplace too.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, another question here. Is there a risk that employers rely too much on peer support and mental health first aiders without paying enough attention to things that affect well-being, such as workplace and poor management practice? And this is the last question.
I would really hope not. I would hope the answer is no to this question, and I think that's because peer support should be an additional tool within the workplace, not instead of. It should be something that works alongside all the already existing kind of processes and procedures organisations have in place, and it would be kind of irresponsible, I think, for it then to solely sit on peer support. And going back to kind of what John said, peer support's confidential anyway, so there shouldn't be any feeding up to HR or managers about why somebody's being supported and what that might mean for kind of their productivity or absence in the workplace. So I would, this should definitely be a no answer. It shouldn't happen. It should be just seen as an additional supportive tool for staff to be able to access alongside all those already established procedures.
Anyone else?
Again, I'd just say I would agree, but say the opposite in that, yes, there is a risk, and the peer support isn't there to stop managers not being a manager in the right place and time. So wellbeing isn't a standalone agenda on its own. It needs to be a broader approach, and it needs to match up with, as we've said before, management training, making sure managers can know how to have the right conversations in the right settings at the right times. So it is very much a joined up approach. It isn't, wellbeing isn't a standalone agenda on its own. But so I would say there is a risk, but you've got to do everything you can so that employers don't just think, there's peer support, who can sort that out, I'll just get on with managing other things. So I agree with you, I just worded it differently.
Right, that's great. Thanks a lot for that all. Thank you all for your participation in this as well this morning. I know you've all been as nervous as I've been, so it is appreciated that you are all here. So just to sum up then, obviously I spoke about peer support first thing, what we've done within West Yorkshire Police. Helen gave us a really good and interesting presentation on healthy minds, which I found fascinating because I'd actually not really come across healthy minds before, so that was interesting to hear. From Lucy and Elizabeth, it was really good from my point of view to hear about what's going on around wellbeing initiatives within Leeds Trinity University. I've got a little bit of a vested interest there in that our new police officer recruits are going through university to have their training there, and I'm involved in their wellbeing days, so I've got a real interest in what's going on there at the moment. And I liked a bit about being human. Absolutely, we do all need to be human with this. From Ros, really good explanation of what peer support was and its benefits, amongst other things, which as I said before, really resonated with me in terms of what we've done within West Yorkshire Police. And from Andrea, a lot of information there, Andrea, which I really got a lot out of your evaluation. There was too much there for me to actually mention, but on your key themes, organisational policies and procedures, absolutely that needs some attention to. We need the help of the organisations when we're doing this sort of thing. So overall, I think we've given a real good account of ourselves and what peer support is and how it can benefit in amongst other things. So thank you everybody for taking part. We're going to have a break now. We're going to come back at 11:45 when we're going to have a masterclass in supporting people with change and uncertainty. So thank you all for continuing to be here, and we will speak to you again shortly.